we're talking about this stage of the game, internal evidence. So there's external data and internal. The external is saying, do we have manuscripts that talk about the story? Again, you could have an ancient story you found on the ground in the deserts of Egypt that talks about ancient unicorns. Well, whoever wrote it, we're trying to get back to the earliest copy, whoever wrote that story. The story could be nonsense. It could be fiction. It could be about cooking. It could be about whatever, poetry. We're trying to get back to whoever wrote it and they're close to the original as possible. The same thing is true with the New Testament and the Old Testament. So that's the external data, the manuscript tradition. We cover that pretty quickly. And then the next stage is what we call the internal. And the internal data is when we actually start looking at the story itself or the stories. Are they likely to be true? Are they likely to be true? The first major point I brought up is that the Gospels, almost every scholar agrees that they're an ancient form of life or biography or bios. And that's very important because, for several reasons, but one is because in the ancient world, a biography was a kind of history, which means they had novels, they had romances, they had fictions, they had myths, they had legends, they had all kinds of things. But the biography was also a kind of genre. And as long as you hear me ever teach, as long as I'm here at this church, you realize I'll say the same thing 100,000 times about this. The first step in interpreting the text, any text, is learning the genre. So if I read poetry like it's a cookbook, or a cookbook like it's a poem, I'm going to get all messed up. Everybody knows you have no genre. Same thing about Gospels. The Gospels are not a stenographic record. They're not a journal. They're not an autobiography. They're lives. So the Gospel writers wrote them very particular. I talk about the features of a Gospel, the biography, how it's about the main character, and they choose the events they want. They can move events around in the chronology. They don't really care about that. But that means at minimum, it doesn't mean everything that happens in a gospel is true or actually happened. It means we assume that the authors and the audience would have assumed at least the gist really happened. So if it were, say, a myth, we would say, no, the ancient audience would have said, no, that's nonsense. But because it's a biography, we know in the ancient world, if I were to time travel, they would say, oh, take that seriously. Doesn't mean every detail is going to be corroborated and so forth, but that's a big one. Any question about biography? Any? There's a lot more there, but I'm hitting highlights because of that. The second reason why I think it's historically probable is that there were characters who were recorded, and here's an example that we talked about briefly the last time in the New Testament. These are characters these are all corroborated both in ancient literature and in archaeology. So these are actual, real characters that no historian doubts existed. None. It's different from saying these aren't listed Captain America or Bilbo Baggins. These are historical characters listed. So that's important because it makes it much more probable that it's telling a story about what happened in the ancient world. Of course, as a biography, people expect characters to work.
If you would.
Yeah, yes.
Can you go back to the last slide?
Sure.
James the Just. Never heard of that dude. Can you give just a little bit?
Yeah, what you have is the book of James. Sometimes I call him James the Just in the early church.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, it's I think it's an early church father.
Okay.
Yeah. So, good question. So biography, they record characters that are corroborated, a lot of them. They record locations that are a lot of them located, and that's really important. And that shows up all over the place. And that's where we stopped last time. Any questions or comments about this? Anything? No? The last thing is, not the last thing, another thing is names. The names and the frequency of names fit perfectly in first century Palestine only. Now, scholars know the frequency of names in the ancient world in this time period because of literary evidence and epitaphs. So scholars have gone and recorded the names on every single tombstone and inscription and ossuary of the time period. That's been discovered. And they compile that data together. Two scholars, Richard Bauckham and Peter J. Williams, have produced works on these topics. But it's phenomenal. I don't think I have a... Yeah. So, for example, if you'd ask right now, really, if I ask anybody, you don't have to answer, but if you think about just for a moment, if I said, give me the top 10 baby names of 2020, how many think you do the top 10 names? Or the top 5? And I mean guess, meaning, and you look at the data and realize that you're exactly right on the U.S. data, census and data. How many think you can do it from 10 years ago? How about 100 years ago? How about the top 10 baby names in France last year? Pierre. Or Canada. Pierre. Pietre. Or Mexico. The point is, so it's unlikely, it's very unlikely we would all get the top 10 baby names, even top 5 names in America. It's extremely unlikely we get them in top 10 names in France or Mexico or the Philippines because they change languages, change cultures. Very, very unlikely. What's striking is when you look at the actual evidence we have, the epitaphs, the literary evidence of the time period, and they go to the top 10 people's names. And in the ancient world, they didn't change names and think of the most clever new name all the time. They tended to keep similar names in the exact same geography, the same locale. So the popular people's names in Egypt were not the same as Israel, not the same in Rome, not the same in Carthage, not the same in Colossae. In Palestine, there were common names that were repeated. If you look at the Gospels, the top 2 men's names was Shimeon, Simon, and Joseph, the top 2 in the first century Israel. Outside the New Testament, it's 15.6% of all names were Simon and Joseph. The Gospels, it's 18.2%. It's almost the exact same percentage you'd find in the real world. So the top 2 names, Simon and Joseph. People say that like Jesus' earthly father's name is Joseph. So Jesus was the 6th most common name in the ancient world in Palestine. So a lot of people call Jesus, like going to Mexico, I guess. The top 9 men's names in first century Israel outside the New Testament, if you took the top 10 of the top 9 of the top 10 list, 41.5%. You take the same names in the Gospel and Acts, is 40.3%. It's almost identical. The top 2 women's names at the time were Miriam in Aramaic, or Mary, and Salome. That's 28.6% of all females were named that. 1 in 4 were going to be one of those 2 names. 1 in 4. And the Gospels is 38.9%. Top 9 women is 49.7%. The Gospels Acts 61.1%. The point is, what you find are and they give several more. There's several more examples. So you find the frequency, the exact names used in that exact locale, and the frequency of the names appearing match both of those things. The names and the frequencies. The names and the frequencies fit perfectly. It's exactly what we'd expect. You don't see Egyptian names. You don't see tons of Latin names and so forth. You see exactly the names we expect to find based on the epitaphs and the grave sites in Palestine. Now, the only way you could do that, if someone gave the top 10 baby names in America, and you guess you got the top 5, the only way you could do that, I mean, everyone knows this. They say, how did you do that? You either, today be a little different, I've Googled it, but let's say for a second, at minimum, I mean, you're from there, or you got that information from someone from there. There's no way. If you ask me the top 5 names in Canada, our neighboring country, that's like going from Syria to Israel, or Egypt to Israel. That's not that far away, but it's a different country. And if I got all the Egyptian names right, or whatever it might be, they'd say, there's no way you made that up. It's impossible. I don't know where to start if it's Canadian names. I don't know where I could say words, but I have no idea what's common there. That's what we find. That makes it highly likely that whoever made up these stories either again, knew the locations, that geography, but even knew the names of the people, or what most historians think it means it's actually we're representing oral tradition passed down from people from Palestine. Maybe pause there. Any questions or comments about that? Does that make sense? Well, think about it. I mean, if the gospel said, and then Hillary said to barbecue, like, what? You make that up, man. No one's named Hillary in first century Palestine. Jacques Cousteau married Mary. No, he didn't. There was no Jacques. There's no French in the ancient world. You know they made that up. I mean, especially in scholarship, but any normal person would think, that's not making any sense. Amun-Re met Mary on the road. Amun-Re is Egyptian. That's the name of the Egyptian god. No one was called Amun-Re in Israel. No one was. As soon as I saw that name, I would know it's Egyptian. So that means the character needs to be from Egypt. Or they say, you're from Judea? No, he's not. No, he's not. That's made up. Whoever did that didn't know anything about anything. But that's not what we find in the Gospels. We find the exact names and the frequencies we expect. And that's really amazing. All right, I'll go ahead if there's no questions, comments. The Gospels are not overly Pauline. Pauline is the adjective for meaning having to do with the Apostle Paul. Or you might say Gentile or pagan. For example, in Paul's letters, if you read Paul's letters in the book of Acts 2, let's omit Acts for a second, see the Paul's letters. If you read Paul's letters, the theological and pastoral problems that Paul faces are not the problems we find in the Gospels. In Paul's world, he has a profound emphasis upon his Gentile mission, Greek and Roman mission. That's one of the problematic reasons we're seeing Gentile verse. Yeah. Anyway, is that a Gentile mission? So they're usually Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, usually Greeks or Romans. That's not what we find in the Gospels. There's not emphasis at all on a Gentile mission in the Gospels. It's barely there at all. In Paul's world, a big issue is whether or not the people should be circumcised. That's not an issue whatsoever in the Gospels. There's issues in Paul's world and his letters about the issues of justification. What does it mean for a person to become a Christian? Whether it's through what they call works of the law or through faith alone, that's not at all in the Gospels at all. The phrase, the title given for Jesus that's used predominantly in Paul's letters is Son of God. That's barely used at all in the Gospels. And I always know people, when I meet average Christians, most average Christians are overwhelmingly Pauline. They don't know this. When scholarship, we smell you coming. There's Pauline Christians, and they just, you can tell. You can tell right away. And I said this to Jason on the job interview, and when he said, "What's the gospel?" and I explained it as Jesus would, and then Jason explained it as Paul would. And I said, "Right, you explained it as the Pauline." He looked at me kind of crazy. I said, "We all do it. You either start with Jesus and get to Paul, or you start with Paul and go to Jesus." He goes, "Well, no. That's the way it is, because the emphases are different." So Paul likes to use Son of God vocabulary, and I can tell you why if you want to know, but in the Gospels, that's hardly ever used. And Paul's letters, he talks a lot about end times or eschatology. It's not in the Gospels. A little bit. But there's a lot more emphasis in Paul's letters. The role of bishops or elders and offices are in Paul's letters, not in the Gospels. There's various heresies that he's combating in Paul's letters are not in the Gospels. That's just some of the things. Who gives a rip? What that means is, if you're a scholar, what that means is you're looking at something that's pre-Pauline. Why does that matter? Because when did Jesus live? Before or after Paul? Anybody know? He lived before Paul. Jesus lived in the 30s. He probably died around AD 33. Probably April 4th, AD 33. April 5th, AD 33. No, April 3rd, AD 33. He was resurrected April 5th. April 3rd, AD 33.
You're saying AD.
AD. I know Dominique. And then Paul was about the same age of Jesus, probably, though they almost certainly never met. And then later on, Paul had his ministry. So all that to say, the point is, Paul came after Jesus. So if the Gospels were written later on, like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and they were only representing Paul's problem, well, that makes it they're a few decades removed from the events of Jesus. But that's not what we find. Paul's issues are not thrust upon the Gospels. It makes us tell that it means we can have trust that they're early, before Paul. And that's good. Any question or comments about that? Does that make sense? No? Am I tracking? Yeah, good. Another thing that's similar is Gospels fit the Jewish theological landscape of the first century perfectly. For example, when we read other Jewish works like Josephus and the Dead Sea Scrolls, some in Philo, and some from the Jewish commentators at the time called the Midrashim and some other documents, the Targums, you can compare what Jews of the time period were talking about. What were the hot topics of the day? And for example, they talked often about temples and synagogues. We find that all in the Gospels. That's the main things in the Gospels, or the religious sacred sites, or the temple and the synagogue. They emphasize some common doctrines, like there's only one God. That's all in the Gospels. Purity issues, ritual purity, moral purity. That's all in the Gospels. They have contested doctrines. That is, doctrines that they're disagreeing about. We find the exact same issues are disagreeing about in the Gospels, like how God's reign was established. How is his rule being established? Is it being established through sinners? Is it being established at the temple? Is it being established through Jewish sects that go away from the main line? They debated Roman rule, whether it's a good thing, like Sadducees, or whether it's a bad thing, like the Qumran said. We find the same thing in the Gospels. The role of the Messiah, they debated about that, same thing in the Gospels. Life after death, whether or not there is life after death or not. The Sadducees said there's not. The Pharisees say yes, there are. That's exactly what we find in the Gospels. The role of angels is exactly the same thing. Sadducees didn't believe in them. And so you have contested doctrines in the ancient world in Judaism that you also find in the Gospels. That fits perfectly. Again, it's kind of like today, if you went 10 years from now and you shot backwards and you saw a post on Facebook and it said, "This COVID stuff's driving me crazy," you knew immediately about what year it is, right? Year from hell, or years from hell. You'll know right off the bat. It's 2020, 2021, you know, because who's going to talk about COVID? Ideally, let's say it's squashed in 10 years. Let's pray and hope. My point is, you would know right away. Then we say there's an autobiography written around that time period said, Ryan says, I was alive in 2020 and da-da-da. And COVID was the rage. You go, yeah, well, that's very likely he's telling the truth because we know COVID was an issue that exact year or those years. We know it fits perfectly. That's what it is here. And other Jews were talking about these things or fussing about these things. Exactly what we find in the Gospels. You also have common practices in Judaism and the Gospels like circumcision, Shabbat or Sabbath practice, food laws issue, ritual bathing. You have contested practices like the definition of work on the Sabbath. What counts as work? Normal Jews disagreed on that. That's the same thing we find in the Gospels. Remember Mark chapter 2 and Mark 3. Jesus is walking through. The Pharisees go, "You're disciples, or you can't pluck that grain of head out." And they're always, he said, "I'm the Lord of the Sabbath." Fasting on the Sabbath, hand washing. So it fits exactly the topics we'd expect for them to be talking about in those few decades. And I mean those few decades. Around AD 60, things change a lot. There's a guerrilla warfare against Rome, and the whole topics change. And then AD 7, the temples fell. And even in Jewish literature, a big chunk of the Jewish literature, though that survived in a few decades, what they talk about changes. We've got a few decades of time period of exactly what we'd expect to find, and that's what we find in the Gospels. They're not talking about the moon. They're not talking about Egypt. They're not talking about Rome. They're talking about very particular contextual issues. And again, what's the likelihood that someone made that up and got it just right? Just like the names and geography. In other words, it fits like a glove. And that's what we expect to find in a biography. Yeah. Any questions or comments about that? Good. No? Hope your questions don't mean you're bored. Maybe you're bored. All right. Resurrection. Because we're almost done. Y'all aren't asking anything, so we're flying. I think the resurrection best explains Christianity. I'm a Christian. One of the reasons I'm a Christian is because I think the resurrection actually occurred. I don't think the resurrection occurred because I'm a Christian. If the resurrection did not occur, then I'm not a Christian. I told you this before already. I'd be a theist. I think there would be a God. I don't explain morality and the origin of life, all that, tons of things, but I wouldn't be a Christian. I'm not sure if I'd be a Jew either. I would not be a Muslim. I would not be a Mormon. I would not be an atheist. But anyway, the resurrection is one of the major reasons why I live that way. Now, there are those who claim that if you speak of a resurrection, you've left history. And so they say, well, David, what you've had so far is historical evidence for Christianity. You've been talking about names, geography, good for you, little historian. Then you brought that R word into the picture, and now I know you're just a little dumb Christian. You can't talk about resurrection and stay in the realm of history. That's a very common belief amongst certain scholars and certain framework, like Bart Ehrman, and of course certainly atheists and whatever, they'll say we can't talk about that. That is abject nonsense. That's nonsense. What you've left is naturalism. That's a worldview. Great, I don't care about that. I couldn't care less about trying to be true to a worldview. I care about whether worldview is true. History doesn't ask what your worldview is. That's not how reality works. I don't believe in chairs. I don't care, believe it or not. They're right there. You go sit in one. No. I choose not to believe. My worldview doesn't accept chairs. Okay, then your worldview is dumb, or it's ill-informed, or you're ignorant, or you're just big, or you're closed-minded or something. But there's a chair. I see it. I don't see it. Go touch it. I can sit in it. If you're slightly open-minded, you might go, okay, there's something there. Is that what you call a chair? Okay, I guess it'll fit my worldview. That's how reality works. You have something that looks, that's how it is. That's how it is. Historians are like scientists. They look for causes to certain events. That's it. Something happened. What caused it? Now, if you rule out any cause at all, that's, again, because your worldview is closed. It's not because you're so clever. It's not because you're skeptical. I don't do that. You might not be that way, and that's fine. I guess. I think it's unconvincing. I'm open to any cause, no matter what it is, or if it contradicts my own worldview. David, aliens. That's not a chair, it's an alien. Okay, convince me. Maybe it's an alien. Let's talk. I don't care what it is. It's a unicorn. Okay. It's a magical unicorn you can't see. All right, well then, demonstrate some. No, I don't believe in unicorns. I don't do that. I don't do that at all. It's just you need a cause that best explains the data. You need a cause that best explains the data. And for me to be persuaded. And that's, I think, the resurrection. I think the resurrection best explains why these things. Now, let me be real clear about this, real quickly. In Greek, if you looked up, and if you want, we can go to the Bible if you want. In Greek, the same Greek word anastasis can be translated resurrect, or you might say resuscitate. So, for example, in Mark chapter 1, 41 is where he heals the guy with or not that one. So it's in Mark chapter 1, beginning chapter 2. He hears a little girl she's sick, and he says, Talitha kum in Aramaic, girl rise. He grabs her by the hand. He raises her. That's the same Greek word for raise up. He didn't resurrect her. But anastasi literally means goes from a prone position to an erect position. Prone to standing. That's all the word literally means. And so you can use it in the sense of I was asleep and then I raised up. You didn't change your body, right? You just raised up. So that word is used like that. And it is. That's the same Greek word used for Jesus and his resurrection. But when that happens, what the New Testament authors do is they speak of his anastasis in a particular way. They go out of the way to describe it in a certain way. They don't make up a new word. They already have a word for when you're lying down and you get raised up. Instead, what they do, instead of making up a new word, a neologism, they just explain it a certain way. So they'll say things like, Jesus just appeared amongst them in the midst of them. Or he ate fish. Or then he was gone from their midst. So he appears, he disappears, he can eat. He can rise up, as it were, to be enthroned on ascension. They describe it differently. And of course, Paul talks about it. And also, he can say in John's gospel that it's Jesus, but he's hardly recognizable. The gardener, she thinks of the gardener, tell me where he laid his body and I'll go find him. So he's Jesus, but he's not recognizable. Luke chapter 24, he's on the walk to Emmaus, and the guys are chatting with him. Hey, what's the long faces about? They said, are you the only guy in Jerusalem that doesn't know what happened? No, what happened? And he said, well, it's Jesus of Nazareth. We thought he was the one to redeem. The Greek word can be redeem, restore Israel, rescue Israel. But it didn't happen. They were convinced they were just wrong. They were deluded. They were so sad. They thought Jesus was going to be the Savior. He's going to kill them bad guy Romans, and that's not what happened. The Romans killed him. Jesus goes, come on, look at your Old Testament. Luke says, and he walks them through the prophets and the law and the prophets to explain to them how the Messiah must suffer. He's walking. They don't recognize it's Jesus. Walk. And finally he breaks bread. Then they go, it says, and he opens their eyes and sees him. So instead of changing the word, the New Testament authors use the same word, but then give him different features. The Apostle Paul gets real specific. He says, like in 1 Corinthians 15, that he received a brand new body, just like we're going to receive a brand new body. He says like a seed related to a plant. It's related, but they're different. Or like a woman gives birth to someone's child. They're related, but they're different. So you're going to get a brand new body. So that's the first part. Is when I mean resurrection, I mean it in the latter sense toward Jesus, which is when Jesus was raised from the dead, he did not go from dead to he feels better. He got a brand new transformed body that's of the new age, of the new world.
So no zombie Jesus.
No zombie Jesus. Some people think that, but again, if you look at the evidence, it's very unpersuasive. The earliest Christians did not argue at all for a zombie Jesus. They really did believe that he was alive and well. Not dead, but alive and well. And that's very important in his work, which we'll talk about in a second. So, I mean in the second sense. So someone says, David, that guy told me he didn't know his New Testament or Greek. I'm just saying to hear that. Well, yeah, I do. So I'm using it in a very particular way, that the resurrection is in this sense. So just look at these. These are facts most historians about which they concur. These primitive Jews began worshiping Jesus. I'm going to slow down this because this is a really big deal. Jews never worshiped anything else. Not at the time of Jesus. Not in those times. Right before then, there were some martyrs, heroes of the faith. They wrote a whole 2 books about it. And 1 and 2 Maccabees. Particularly in 2 Maccabees, it talks about the brothers who they can't recant the faith. They're not going to bow down to these idols. And they are tortured and killed slowly. They give these long sermons, these talks, all because they won't bow down. And they say God's going to raise us up. And we're going to be resurrected. That's some of the earliest resurrection talk we have. And some of it's in Daniel as well. but particularly to Maccabees, and they are so excited about that. But what they will not do is bow down into the idol. They won't do it. They won't do it. In fact, Jewish people started naming their children Simeon and Simon after these people, these Maccabean martyrs, because they held the ground. Jews did not do it. And so if you think in Jewish theology for a little bit, since we have time, I'll slow down for a second. In Jewish theology, theology just means the study of God. So you have God up here, and there is a hard line, and then there's everybody else. So you might say there are spiritual beings. This is where everyone teaches you incorrectly. Oh, they're called angels. No. Angels are spiritual beings that have a particular job description. So some of the spiritual beings are called angels. Some are called seraphim, some are called tefillin. There's different names for them, but they're spiritual beings. And then they can be angels, yes. And of course, then you have humans, because spiritual beings, they're conscious. They have a soul with no body. We have a soul and a body. And of course, then you have all kinds of animals beneath us. Now, we have no idea if there's life on other planets, the degree to which there are other different beings and so forth. But in Judaism, this is the hard line. You cannot absolutely oppose to Mormonism. You cannot cross this line. See, Joseph Smith taught in Mormonism that Jesus was the spirit child between astral heavenly Mary and a literal father figure who called God the Father, who grew up to be God the Father. And so Jesus was a soul spiritual being who also grew up to be a God as well. Then you can be a God too. Everyone grows up. If they're mature in their spiritual maturity, they become gods. That's absolute nonsense. So in Judaism, they would have never, ever believed that. Everybody down here is called one thing in common. They're all creatures. They're all creatures. And of course, creature from creati, from the Latin, to be created, to come into being. And God, only God is creator. And since only God is creator, that means only God is the judge. And these two aspects of God, creator and judge, are fundamentally different. Now, judge means ultimate judge. Sometimes God might give other creatures permission to judge other creatures. But he's capital J judge, if that makes sense. So he's always absolute. These two character traits of God is what we see in Revelation the most, like in Revelation chapter 4. Blessed he who sits on the throne, the one who was, who is, and is to come. For you have created all things, and by all things have come to be. You've created all things. And also Revelation, we see in Revelation 12 and other places, where and like in 4:2, he's sitting on his throne. He's the judge. He's the creator judge. Well, in Judaism, none of these beings are like that, which means, this is the very key, there's only one being that overall does this. So the only appropriate response by all these beings, there's one appropriate response, and you know the word, and that's worship. That's worship. Worship literally means to bow down, to show deference toward, obeisance. It does not mean to sing. It means to bow down toward, to prostrate oneself. And that's why it's a misnomer to say it's a worship service. No, it's not. I mean, kind of. It's a service to metaphorically demonstrate our deference or obeisance. But it is not literally one. It's a praise service, prayer, sermon service, but it's not that. But you can use that sense because no one up there bows down, at least not this church. I haven't seen it so far. But all Jews said that's the natural response to God, which the converse is true, which means no one worships anybody below it. It's completely unethical, completely bad to worship any creature, because that assumes you're treating the creature as if that creature is God. Okay. I said all to say this is fundamental to Jewish and Christian theology. This is exactly what we see in the Gospels. So for the earliest Christians who were all Jews, every one of them were Jews, early on they were the primitive ones, for them to put Jesus up here is unheard of in the history of Judaism. It's just unheard of. That Jews could talk about certain beings that acted like angels who had sometimes the prerogative of God. They could talk that way. Everyone, in some Jewish text. But by Jewish practice, they did not. They did not worship these other high angelic beings. The earliest Jews said, Jesus is up here. They did it by writing, they worshipped him. Now, to worship, to show bow down to Jesus if he's God, again, is unique in the ancient Jewish culture. And to this day, no one does it. Now, you need to explain why these very devout Jews, if you read the document, they sure sound like they're very devout Jews. Why switch? I mean, other Messiah figures had come and gone before the time of Jesus, around the time of Jesus, and after the time of Jesus. And when they died, which we'll talk about maybe in a little bit. Yeah, I've got a bunch of reasons, and a new book I'm writing now. I have some of these. I have more reasons in my book I already wrote. A new book I'm writing, I have more reasons. But you have other Messiah figures. When they die, they're just dead. No one goes and follows them, and they might follow the brother in line. That's not what the earliest Christians did. They didn't go raise up James and say, "Oh, never mind. God just anointed you all of a sudden, brother." That's not what happened. They started worshiping Jesus. And so it's an historical, we might go, this is what atheists do. They go, Romans worship Romulus. They worship Zeus. I mean, they worship Caesar, Augustus. Who gives a rip? They did. You're right. Jews didn't. I don't care what they did. I care about history. And in history, Jews did not do that. Jews got killed before they would do that. They didn't let his image on a silver coin get near the temple, on the off chance that it seemed kind of like they might be worshiping just the image of the emperor. Jews did not do this. But they started doing this with Jesus. I mean, that demands explanation. It's a cause of something. Well, they just had a change of mind. I think the resurrection and ascension best explains that. They began, of course, singing songs, writing poems, worshiping Jesus, praying. They began doing things, not just saying Jesus is with God the Father, like in 1 Corinthians 8:6, which is a phenomenal verse. Maybe I ought to read that too. That's amazing. They prayed to Jesus, or they prayed to God the Father through Jesus. They always put them together. They got to God the Father through our Lord Jesus Christ. That's amazing. They baptized in the name of Jesus. Jews did not do that. Jews did not ever pray through Moses, through Abraham. They didn't baptize in the name of Moses, in the name of Abraham. They never.
Would that be blasphemy if they did?
The assumption is they may be blasphemy if they did baptize. Certainly pray. But baptize, they might do in such a way. The idea is that a dead criminal who died on the cross now is the source of all authority when you get dumped in the water and it changes your life. They never did that with any Jewish figure in the history of ever. They preached in his name. They preached in the name of the Lord Jesus. Remember in Acts 4, it's only by that name by which you must be saved. They never taught, you didn't get saved by the name of Moses. You didn't get saved by the name of Abraham. Those are the two, or King David. Those are the biggies. The biggies. No one ever got saved in those names. They healed sick people. They exorcised demons in the name of Jesus, the authority of Jesus. Never did by Moses, Abraham, not Muhammad, not Joseph Smith. Why did these Jews start behaving this way? That's a radical mutation in what we call devotional practices.
How does modern day Judaism reconcile that? Without getting too far in, because that's a whole separate pastor study, I'm sure.
So how do modern Jews deal with the fact that those things happen?
Yeah.
Most modern Jews know nothing about the Gospels, so they do nothing with it. I wish I could have more. They don't. I'm telling you, they do not read the Gospels. The average Jew, and I've heard many talks, read the books, heard the presentations, heard the podcast. The average modern Jew is convinced, when they think of religions, there's Judaism and everybody else. The ones that get closest are Christians, they're very annoying because they keep talking about Jesus all the time.
At least it's the same God, right?
But at least they're trying similar God, that's right. And secondly, if they're Christian, they're Catholic. And third, good for them for having their religion. That gets them to God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But we're Jews, and we don't need a Gentile religion. Because good for them means they're Gentiles, we're Jews. And so for them, Christianity equals usually white, Gentile, Catholic religion. That gets them to be good people. As long as they're praying to God, as long as they keep it that simple, they don't read the Gospels, they stay away from it, they don't give a rip. They don't care. Oh, what's his name? Ben
Shapiro?
Shapiro. He calls them fiction.
Yeah.
The gospel's just fiction to him. Which is, it's stupid. I mean, for such a smart guy to say it's just nonsense. I don't ever, I love the guy, great, but have you read him? I mean, if you're a smart guy at all, if you're open-minded at all, why wouldn't you? Fiction, really?
You might think parts of them are fiction.
You might think part, but that means you think there really are ancient, like, comic books? Fiction? Like, you go to a library, that's what atheists say. It's on the same category as Captain America, or even worse than that. It's just fictional nonsense. It's just make-up. It's just Harry Potter. Really? I mean, if you're slightly, you at least say, well, it's an ancient kind of form of biography, but I don't believe it happened, whatever. Now, what do Jewish scholars say about it? Jewish scholars who do, and they are studying, like Amy Jill Levine, who's at Vanderbilt, super awesome, great. She's a practicing Jew. She's at Vanderbilt, and she's a well-known professor, or some other. But Levine, there's not many that are that way. And Giza Vermesh was at Oxford for years and years. He's a well-known Jewish scholar. So Giza Vermesh, Amy Jill Levine, they would say that absolutely happened. There's no doubt about it historically that everything on the screen here, which I'll talk more, they would all agree this happened. They would. They would disagree on, and they would all say the earliest Jewish followers of Jesus believed they had an experience. For which or about which they thought the necessary logical corollary to that experience is, I've got to start singing songs to him, I got to worship, I got to whatever. Even Giza Ramesh, and maybe Amy Jill Levine will also say, I'm willing to concede he was resurrected. They would say, but he's not the Messiah.
Yeah, they draw a line.
It's not the Messiah, not the Messiah. And to which you're going to say, why is not the Messiah? They say, because we all know the Messiah, when he comes back, the whole world comes to right, not just one person starts communities and they start sharing the gospel. So in my view is, and I've read my new book, again, I don't approach this that way. I don't have a pre-clean mold and then go, does it fit or not? Nope. I go, wait a second, if he really was raised from the dead, if you're willing to concede that, does it say something about God the Father? This guy, you should listen to him? And I guess they would disagree with me. I don't know. So, but scholars, historians agree with everyone. That's why these aren't controversial points I have on the screen at all. But the average Jew doesn't know them. And they don't care because that's a Gentile religion.
Have you ever interacted with anybody from, I think it's called Jews for Jesus?
Jews for Jesus? Yes, I have.
Mm-hmm. I've had some interesting conversations with them.
Yeah, one guy came and spoke at a school one time. He was great. He so reminded me of the Apostle Paul, what I reminded. I mean, he was fiery, and but he was on fire for Jesus. He was a world-class pianist. And then he gave his testimony. It was amazing.
I had some friends growing up, a family that her dad was a Messianic Jew, and they practiced, of course, the Jewish holidays, but they're very devout Christians as well. They went to Church of Baptist. They didn't go to Messianic Jewish church, but.
And I think it's Dan Brown, Dr. Dan Brown. Is it Brown? Dan Brown? You look up. I think it's Dan Brown. He's really well known in the Jews for Jesus. He's written several really good books on like Old Testament texts that speak of Jesus the Messiah. He does debates, lectures, talks. He's a bright guy.
Marlene asked a good question.
Good. What was that good question?
Come on.
Why the Jews they have like this the
yarmulke?
and also is that Hanukkah is a Jewish holiday?
Good, yeah.
Hanukkah
So-
and why do they have like this circle one?
The little circle hat.
Yeah,
Yeah, called a
circle one.
Yeah, it's called a yarmulke. A
Yeah,
yarmulke
in the
is, it's from an old tradition. I think it was started in medieval times. I don't know exactly what year it started, but it's not biblical. It comes later on. It became a tradition to a metaphorical way of saying basically they don't want God who's looking down on us to see our sin. So it's blocking us. I think the average Jew, if I asked him, do you think that blocks? And I think they would say, no. Why do you do it then?
It's more a statement of faith now.
It's more a statement of faith. Yeah, I think they would say, no, I'm a Jew.
But
it probably
if you go to a synagogue or something,
Yeah.
you're provided with that if you don't have it.
Yeah, if you go to a synagogue, they'll give you one. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. If you go to. And so they do wear that. Now it's a sign of, usually, it's not a sign that you're a Jew. It's usually a sign that you're an Orthodox Jew. That's usually the sign. If you have that, it means you're an Orthodox Jew, almost certainly. Not universal, but that's usually the sign. And Hanukkah, yeah, is very much a Jewish holiday. Hanukkah celebrates an event I just alluded to earlier called the Maccabean Revolt. The Maccabean Revolt happened around 165 BC, about 163, I'll say 162. It was about 3 years where these, can you read that at all? Anyway, when there's a guy there's a guy named Antiochus. His nickname was Epiphanes the second. It means the great one. His nickname was Epimanes, the madman. But anyway, Antiochus Epiphanes II, he came into town, basically. He came into Israel. The short story is he took over the temple. He sacrificed a pig inside the temple around, which desecrated the temple. It was a very big deal. That's like blowing up the White House. I mean, it was a gargantuan. Then he went all through Israel and he appointed priests to rule over the different villages and towns. People weren't Jews. And then around 165 BC, a group of Jews had enough of that, and they got the local puppet priest, killed him on the altar, and started a guerrilla warfare unit. Guerrilla warfare, if you're familiar, they didn't form an army, they just started killing and hiding, and killing and hiding, and killing and hiding. Well, eventually what happened is they go all the way to the temple, and they make it back to the Temple Mount, and as he goes into the Temple Mount, Judas Maccabeus. Maccabeus is a nickname, it means the hammer. Judas, from Judah. That's why the word Jude comes from Judah. And they would say Judas. Judas, Jesus is the guy who betrayed him. Judas is the most common male Jewish name at the time because it's named after Judah, the tribe of Judah. So anyway, Judas Maccabeus, he comes into town and they wave palm branches at him. And he's a conquering hero, and they say he cleanses the temple, which means he gets all that other Syrian pagan nonsense out and reestablishes the temple. He cleanses it. That's exactly what the Jews think in Jesus' time. They think he's going to go cleanse it, but he doesn't. When he goes into town, the temple, the legend is, when he goes to the temple, and for about 7 days, there was foreign powers in that part. No Jew was back there to light the special candles, the oil candles that are lit in the Holy of Holies. And when they go back there after all this time, the light's still lit. There's still oil burning. It's a miracle. What do they call it?
Festival of Lights.
The Festival of Lights. And to this day, the menorah, of course, it's actually, see, 2, 4, 6. It's actually 6, and the middle one's longer. The seventh candle is actually to take off to light the other 6. But anyway, that's the idea. So Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, celebrates the miracle when God let the temple, the lamp and the Holy of Holies keep burning, even though no one was there to refill the oil. But bigger than that, it celebrates when Judas Maccabeus came and cleansed the temple. And they had independence as a national state in Israel. Independence for about 3 years. The next time Israel will be independent, depending on when you count it, is 1947. Now, they created a constitution in 1945. So, sorry, Israel and Jews, whatever you're mad at me. But anyway, so either it's 1945 or when the UN acknowledged it, whatever. That's a long time. Almost 2,000 years later, it's the first time that they're going to be independent. Because they went straight from this to another foreign power, another foreign power, another foreign power, another foreign power, all the way to them.
So between 1945 and 1947, 1946, Bill Clinton and George Bush Jr. Was born.
Oh, yeah, they're born. How about saying
They were born in 1946.
There you go.
Bill Clinton and George Bush Jr.
How about that?
Well, there you go.
So the Festival of Lights celebrates, so it is very much a Jewish holiday.
Oh, okay.
That
Thank
celebrates
you, Pastor
God.
David.
No, that's good.
Thank
That's
you
good.
so much.
I got a question for
Yep.
you. So, how many different sects of the Jews are there? There's the Orthodox, there's the Messianic, and
How many sects are there today?
Right.
There are a lot. I don't know. There are several branches. There are branches, and then there are subcategories in those branches.
Okay.
So there's a lot.
Are there any Messianic Jewish temples around or congregations around the area?
I do not know. I don't.
Oh yeah, you
Good
just
question.
got it.
Sorry. Yeah. You know. Sure.
Y'all
Yeah,
ever heard about that?
I'm sure Peoria.
Yeah. Peoria,
There's a-
probably.
There's a lot in California, in Hollywood. Almost all the, you know, the
Scientology. We're
producers
gonna talk about
there.
Scientology next.
The producers in the Hollywood movie are Jewish.
Yeah.
They are all Jewish there.
Yeah. Jews, in general, can't stand Jews for Jesus. They seem as overwhelmingly annoying and traitors. They're traitors. Again, because, the assumption is Christianity is a Gentile, chiefly white, chiefly Roman Catholic religion, and now you Jews have joined their side. So you're traitors. I don't want to hear you talk about stuff. Usually they don't. I guess they're very frustrated. Of course, the reason why they think they're all Roman Catholic is because most Jews live in New York, and almost all Christians in New York are Catholic. Which is why every single TV show, movie, and whatever, they're always Catholic. They think the world is full of Jews and Catholics. That's it. The world's Jews and Catholics. Which is silly. So this is true. Groups of priests, Pharisees, even Saul, Paul radically changed sides. Why would that happen? If you read carefully in Acts 15 in the so-called Jerusalem Council, which was the most important meeting in the first several decades of the church, it changed the world. It changed the world in Acts 15. It says, and former priests. Why would priests who could have been part of the Sanhedrin that tried Jesus, it could have been, we don't know for sure, but priests in Jerusalem, and all of the gospel, the priests are always opposed to Jesus. They become Christians. Why would certain Pharisees do it? And why, of course, would Saul Paul, and his name is always Saul, it's always Paul. Every preacher gets that wrong. Every person, when he became a Christian, became Paul. That's false. So I'm shaking my head. I'll talk more about this. I'm out of read Bob for all this work. Shaul is his Hebrew name. If you want to read it Hebrew, it means prayed for, asked for. Okay, I will. Okay. So, and I'll keep it in English. Saul means asked for, prayed for. So, because it goes all the way back for in the Old Testament, when Saul was asked for his parents, asked for a baby, they called him Shaul, asked for. It's very common for people who have different languages who live amongst different languages, like today, in fact. So my brother's name is Stephen. If you're in Mexico, it'd be Esteban. All right, so you make the names. It's counterpart in language. So they would say Shaul. Why not? If literally is Shaul, why not say Saulus? Because that's Latin and Greek. He could have done Shaul and Saulus, which would have been pretty common. The problem with that is Saulus means, well, it means one who walks with a prostitute. So it's hard to get a job. So that won't work. Instead, what he picks up is almost certainly his nickname, Paulus, which means shorty. It means short one. The original shotty. Okay. Not for you old people. Thank you. I gave that joke in college one time. Anyway, that's what it means. So his name Shaul is Hebrew, and Paulus is Greek. On his deathbed, kind of before they beheaded him, it was still Shaul and Paulus. It never changed. There's so many church legends that are alive and well in the church, and that's one of them. His name in the book of Acts, he's labeled Saul, and then the author of Acts changes it to Paul in Acts 10. When Paul and his people are near Sergius Paulus, who was the name of the local governor or maybe prefect. And after he makes his appeal to Sergius Paulus, from that point in the narrative on, Acts calls him Paul. We don't know why. Either it's in honor of Sergius Paulus, maybe he became a Christian, we don't know why. But in the book of Acts, from then on, he doesn't call him Saul, he calls him Paul. Has nothing to do with his conversion. So he changed sides, and this guy, all guys, couldn't stand the Christians. His own words. Every historian believes that Paul wrote Galatians and Philippians. In Philippians 3, he says, in Galatians 2, I used to hunt down the church, the Christians, that he hated them. And he almost certainly hated what they were saying. which was the first 2 points, which is the worshiping Jesus, they're praying to him, they're baptizing in his name, they're preaching in his name, and that fits also what we find in the book of both John and the book of Acts, which is when the Sanhedrin in Acts 4, when they get Peter and James come out and say, shut up, stop talking about Jesus all the time. And they say, you got to do what you got to do. We must obey God rather than
Man.
man. Remember that whole thing? The point is, they were saying, stop talking about his resurrection and his name. And Saul Paul almost certainly fits that same bandwagon. Why in the world? Some people say the reason why the earliest disciples began preaching and baptizing in Jesus' name is they felt so guilty. We failed him. He told us about love and love and love and love. As long as it doesn't hurt anybody, just keep loving. But he never said that. You hear that junk all the time. And they just feel so guilty after you die. And they go, you know what? Let's start a movement. That's what some theory, that's a lot of people think that's the theory. Okay, even if that's true, which is not, it's gibberish. Why would Saul Paul change sides? He didn't feel guilty. He wasn't a disciple of Jesus. Why did he go on to be the world's very first, biggest evangelist? But that really happened. No historian doubts it. Well, why would he do that? He didn't feel, it doesn't make any sense. And of course, they maintained this idea that Jesus raised from the dead through persecution, ostracization, and for some people, death. You'll often hear preachers and teachers say, all the early Christians were killed for the faith. No, they weren't. At least we don't have evidence for that at all. Some were. We know that Paul was by Emperor Nero, probably around the year AD 66. We know that James the Just, we know that he was. That's in Josephus, and that's confirmed. Those two at least. Some of the early church fathers say that other apostles were killed, but we don't know how much historical accuracy is in that. We don't know if those are just called hagiography, that is stories of the holy ones, and they kind of got embellished. Is it hagiographic? It's hard to tell. Some probably did, some did not because they were,
What is the meaning of
Good.
ostracization?
Sure. Ostracization means to be excluded from a group, to be treated as inferior or other, less than, ostracized.
Oh.
So that's the noun. Ostracization is the state of being kicked out of a group.
Like the lepers.
Like lepers, they're ostracized.
Didn't you read a book about martyrs one time here?
I've read some books about martyrs. I did. I did. That's right. We can say more, but I'm going to stop there on this one. Any question or comments you have about this? Would you like to look at any Bible verses on this, or do you just take my word for it? Anything else? What do you think?
You mentioned the eschatological.
Yes, ma'am.
What is the meaning of eschatological?
I'm so glad you asked me that.
You say it just perfectly.
You said it well. Act like you know how to say it.
She does good.
Very
I had to hear
good.
that word a lot before I learned how to say it.
I'm looking
Good.
at it.
Last days.
What?
Eschatological.
Yeah, that's it. So eschatology is the noun. Eschatological is the adjective. And that's what you said was eschatological. Very good. I'm sorry. I was about to do it in Greek, but I keep forgetting that won't help at all. Eschaton, if you spelled it in English, it would look like this. Eschaton means something like end or last things. And so when you add the Greek word logo for logos, it literally means word or means saying. But when it's used as taxonomy in English, it means usually the study of. So it's a study of end times, a study of end last things. So eschatology is a study of end times.
Oh, okay.
Good question.
I think that was Michael Brown you were talking about.
Michael Brown. I knew it wasn't Dan. Thank you. Michael Brown. Yes, Michael Brown. Yeah. Michael Brown. Dr. Michael Brown, yeah. He's the one that has a lot of...
Debates with James White and all of that.
Yeah, and Michael Brown does a lot of good work. I think good work with the Jews.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great job. We got a little different views on some things, but overall, yeah, he's good. Any other questions, comments?
Why did they the creature they mentioned 9 times in the King James Bible. It's a unicorn. Why did they mention that 9 times? They asked the question today in the radio.
Oh, on the radio show. Uh-oh.
So they said,
Why does it mention unicorns?
What creature, what kind of creature it mentioned in the King James Bible 9 times? And somebody answered unicorn. So what is this unicorn? Looks like a horse or something.
Yeah.
Unicorn.
Yeah, I don't. That's a good question. I've looked that up. Unicorn's not in the Hebrew or the Greek. The King James Version is simply just wrong at times. It's just wrong. Yeah. Like I was said before, that we did the manuscripts. Any modern translation is better than King James Version. We have more manuscripts. We know more about Greek. We know more about the Old and New Testament, which means you know more Hebrew and Greek. We just know more. So, unicorn's not in the Bible. King James Version might have said that, but they're just mistaken.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, good question, but yeah. Biting my tongue, holy biting my tongue. The silliness that comes out of anyway. Thank you. No, good question. I wish I could say.
Sorry, thank you.
No, it's good. I mean, I wish I could go back to the text and say it probably the original Hebrew Greek probably something like horse or something like that. Probably. But in all fairness, I can't quote that on. I don't have a lot of King James Version quoted, but I'm sorry about that. So much I don't know. Anything else? Questions, comments? All right, last but not least.
The suspense is killing me. I hope it lasts.
Is this a lie? It's lying? Yeah. It's lying.
That's not clicking. I don't know why it keeps freezing. I don't know what's up. Suspenseful is narrate. Just the overall narrative of the Gospels, quite plausible. It's just quite plausible. For example, the idea of a Jewish teacher in Palestine speaking of the kingdom of God who gains opponents and is crucified for being a dissident. I mean, is that hard? I mean, that's not good fiction. Not an alien who came down and rode a unicorn and ate a rainbow. I mean, the point is, it's just that's the kind of stuff we would expect. It's an overall narrative. Now you say, well, except the miracles. Okay, but even if we omit them, and he still said the things he said, did the things he did, it's just very plausible. The differences in detail are expected. We can't prove everything in the Gospels. I haven't said that one time that we can. I'm very adamant about that. There's a lot in the Gospels we cannot corroborate. Whole narratives, dialogue, we cannot corroborate. We don't know for sure. If Jesus said every single word, I'm not saying that. But for it to be probable, very probable, I don't need every word to be corroborated. I don't need that to happen. Nobody needs that to happen. All needs to be very historically likely or very likely it occurred. If that's true, I would say the person has to deal then with the Gospels in the New Testament, deal seriously with it before dismissing it. That's my last of this whole section here. So I think historical evidence for Christianity is very probable. And I think no other religion fits the criteria like this, including Judaism. I don't think it fits the same criteria. Mormonism does not. Buddhism does not. Islam does not. So what? Scientology. You hear of Scientology? I used to teach that world religions. It's one of those fun religions I did in the last second to have the kids laugh. I try my best to present it with a straight face. But. Anything else? Do you have all that memorized?
Yes, sir.
Last but not least, so I went from, I think God's the best explanation. Remember, we're back to page 2 or 3, or 1, whatever it is. God's the best explanation for several facts about the universe, about reality. I think there were 10 things. And so that's in my, if you went back in my circle, so I'm going back to remind you, and we're almost done. This is it. So that's it. So I go from quite probable. I think, remember there's facts of reality. 2 is very probable. That's Christianity. This is my elevator speech. And then there's a couple things that I think make Christianity almost virtually certain. And that last thing, of course, is religious experience. This one's real short and sweet because it is short. So, let me see. Yeah. That's it. What makes this almost virtually certain is the fact that I've had religious experiences. I know countless people that have religious experiences. And you say, well, you know, I know Disney World exists. How do you know? I am certain. I'm almost certain. Unless I was crazy. How do you know? Because I've been there. I've been there. I thought Disney World existed before I went. I thought that because people I trusted had told me about Disney World. I'd seen Disney World pictures before that I assumed weren't made up. But I wasn't sure Disney World existed until I went myself and go, I've been to Disney World. This is it. I can know about God and Christianity through other people I trust will tell me. And that's how most people come to knowledge about God. That's in my experience, a big chunk of people aren't Christians because what they think are, they believe someone else's story about faith and go, oh, that makes sense. So they know about Disney World. They know about Christianity. They might have seen pictures of what it looks like, a life changed, but they themselves are not a life changed. Until your life has been changed, and that's why my religious experience, to have those experiences, then you don't know. To use John's vocabulary, to be born from above. So just for fun for a second, let's look at Romans 5:5. You have your Bible with you? Romans 5:5. And then 2 Corinthians 1:22. Anybody can read aloud?
I have 5:5.
Romans 5:5.
This hope will not disappoint us, because God's love has been poured out in our hearts through the Holy Spirit who was given to us.
God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. What's so striking about that is how that articulates so many persons' experience of conversion. It feels like something or someone, right, not a thing, I was going to say a change, but someone is filling us with something. And I was going to show videos, but we won't. I mean, there's videos you can see people. The guy who was the main drummer for Korn, he does that phenomenal testimony. He's a drug addict, has a daughter, and one day he finally gives himself to Jesus. He said, and all of a sudden this love just poured over me, just came over me. I did this sensation of warmth all over me. I was love. He said it was love, love, love. I thought, I bet I know Romans 5:5, but he's described Romans 5:5. But I've met many people. I have experienced that. I've experienced that feeling, and that it's not. And this is the difference. There's a difference between having a feeling about something and an awareness. An awareness is a kind of knowledge. Those are not the same thing. And many people think they're the same. Well, I've had good feelings too. I've cried at the end of movies. I've cried at the commercials. Good. You can have incredible cathartic moments, right? Right? Of course, from the Greek, katharos, which means clean or purifying. You can have boy, that therapy really helped me. I just got it off my chest. You can have powerful emotional feelings. That is not what I'm talking about. When I'm in religious experience, both of those, the adjective matters to me. Religious or Jesus or Christian. At the end of my book, Skeptic Challenge of Christian, I have a whole chapter. I called it Why I know I've met the Spirit of the Risen Christ, the Spirit of the Risen Jesus. I did that way, that's more wordy, but that's on purpose. I've met someone. There's an awareness and knowledge. Like, it's not just I felt a warm. Notice how the Korn guy, he didn't say, I felt warm. He said, it was love, 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 and it felt. There's a cognitive aspect to it. And that's the part, for most people who talk about religious experience, they've had that before. I used to teach at a college for 2 or 3 years. I taught world religions. That was the same course I taught all the time. And I would always ask the people at some point during the class, I say, raise your hand if anybody had a religious experience before. A religious experience. However you would articulate it, however you define it, anybody. And at every single class, there was always 1, 2, 3. And this is after I asked them how many people, what religion, how many people are Christians, how many people are Muslims, how many people don't give a rip, how many are atheists. And there's always half to a majority Christian, or claim to be, because this is Texas, of course. They're all there. But anyway, the point is, so that's fine. But when I got to religious experience, hardly anyone ever raised their hand. And one time, a Muslim girl did. So I was really interested because Muslims never have raised their hand. Ever, 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 ever. And she was dolled up. She was real pretty, makeup, thick hair. She was not a traditional Muslim. And I said, this is my old story. So I said, really? Would you mind explaining it? What was the religious experience? And she said, one time I think she said she had prayed about a boyfriend, whether he should be engaged or not, or whether I should just keep dating or something like that. And she goes, and I just had this real sense of certainty that I ought to. Something like that. Something like that. And real sense. I go, huh. That's it. Maybe. That's not what I count as religious experience. That was the sense of, ought to do this. I mean, maybe. But that's not what I was talking about. I was the sense of a changed life. The sense of, I've never met one. People say, religions have experiences all the time. They do have experiences, but not what I'm talking about in Christianity. In Christianity, where I grew up, in non-denominational Baptist circles, we called it a conversion experience, a before and after. Now, that exact vocabulary is not in the New Testament, conversion experience, but that's what we're just talking about. And that's what I gave the scripture, Romans 5:5, articulates what I would call a conversion experience. 2 Corinthians 1:22, I'm giving you a lot of time to look that up. Nicole wants to read it?
Sure. Although I say 2 Corinthians, so that really bothers me. That's fine.
You see it or say it?
I say second.
Most people say second. I think
First, second.
You said.
I don't know this.
He always
It bothers you that I say it or you say second?
No, never mind. First.
Oh.
All right. It says, and who has also put his seal on us and given us his spirit in our hearts as a guarantee.
Yeah. So that's also more vocabulary I'm talking about of having that kind of experience. I think Galatians 4:6. Anybody? Is that how you say it here? Galatians?
Yes.
Okay.
I just had to give a hard time. Sorry.
Okay. Galatians
4:6.
Anybody?
Yeah, I got it. Because you are his sons, God sent the spirit of his son into our hearts, the spirit who calls out, Abba, Father.
Yeah, that spirit that cries out, Father. There's some kind of awareness that I have a relationship with the God of the universe, and it's a loving relationship. We can give a lot of stories about that. And I've had that. I've had it. And not everyone's story is the same. Not everyone's experience is exactly the same. But I've had that when I was younger. In different times of my life, I've had experiences where I'm just convinced that the God of the universe has shown up in my life. And I have a handful of those that I can remember with great detail. And one was my call to ministry. I wish I'd written down the exact date. I know it was cold. I could tell you the story if you want, but I know exactly where it was. I just wrote it at the time. It was either Wednesday night or Sunday night. It was after church, blah, blah. But it changed my life. Absolutely changed my life. It wasn't cathartic. It wasn't just feeling good and happy. It was an awareness. It changed the course of my entire life. And this last thing, of course, I've known many people have had experiences too. Before I ask you about your experience, if you'd like to share them, I just want to say this before I forget, I said this at the very beginning, I think, I'll say it at the end again. Almost certainly, you know what, I need to change the top. I should say virtually certain, sorry about that. I say this last because it's logical to start broad and go tiny, but also because though this is the main reason why, and I told you early on, which is the main reason I'm a Christian, it's true, is I've seen too many change lives, including my own. The reason why I don't start there all the time with people, and certainly on studies like this, is because I already told you why, which is there are two ways to make this false. There are two ways to make religious experiences not trustworthy. 2 ways. And they're called defeaters. You have to give a defeater. You either need to say, I'm suffering from some kind of psychological disorder, or even glimpses of one. So maybe I had a delusion. Maybe I was delusional. So there's some kind of psychological disorder. If that's the case, then this is false, which means then I didn't experience anything, which means it's not evidence at all. That's one defeater. The other way to show a defeater on this is, there's one. The other way is to demonstrate that the worldview that I think is convincing is false. So you need to demonstrate that that on historical grounds, false historical or just false history, whatever. That is to say, you need to demonstrate that the New Testament can't be trusted, Jesus never existed, wasn't raised from the dead, or some things like that. Those are the ways to defeat this last one. And that's with anybody's belief, right? Because anybody can be wrong. It's subjective experience. I could be delusional. And so to test myself, as far as I know, I suffer from no psychological disorder. None. I know what psychological disorders are. I've counseled for years. I've read the books. So I think this check's clear. I think I suffer from no particular mental disorder. Secondly, I also don't think the millions of who have experienced religious experience are also all suffering from a particular disorder. Now, Richard Dawkins would say those aren't disorders. It's like a meme. It's a virus in your DNA that's caused you to have that. I don't find that persuasive at all. So I dismiss that because I think that's silly, and I don't think there's any evidence for it. And it's just a theory on this part. That's fine to have theories. I think it's silly. And then, of course, others is for historical. And this is where, so I know myself. I'm the only person in existence that knows myself the best in the first person perspective. God knows the most about me. And the second thing I'm most good at is history, because I went and got 3 degrees. And so what it is, I test these areas, and I go, it seems to be checking out. So I don't think I have a defeater for this one, which is why I put this on the list. But if someone come along and said, I had a very profound Muslim experience, which proves Muhammad's his final prophet, I'd say you're either suffering from a psychological disorder, you had a vision of Muhammad, or the history doesn't bear out. So in other words, I would look at either one of those, or Mormonism. People say this, just read the Book of Mormon so you have a warm, fuzzy feeling. You're going to have a warm, fuzzy feeling. That's the sign it can all be trusted. I'd say, no, that can't be the sign it can be trusted because you could be delusional, or you could want it to fit into a worldview. In other words, you need to look at this. So I find Mormonism false on this grounds, and so does Islam as well, for sure. But anyway, like I've said, most religions do not talk about a profound religious conversion experience. They just don't. Christians do. But most other religions do not, including Judaism. Buddhism doesn't. Islam doesn't do it. It's not obedient. You don't get converted to Islam. You just decide to become a Muslim. You're not converted. You don't have conversion stories in Islam.
They talk about maybe not converted. They converted too. You know, the conversion story.
Right.
Like I've heard of people in prison doing that.
I've decided to become Muslim. I went all in.
Like Muhammad Ali, didn't he convert?
He converted.
Islam, he wasn't born Muslim.
But they won't describe it like this.
Right.
Muhammad changed my
Not a
life.
conversion experience. Right?
I had this,
Yeah, that makes
I'll stop there, and that's my whole study. But any religious experience you like to share?
I've got something I just want to inquire. So I see you're wearing that, Doctor, I see you're wearing your Superman shirt right
Yeah, I
now.
don't usually explain this, so I like to keep it a secret. But
All
today,
right. So do you know where it says Superman leaped over a wall in a single bound?
do I know where he said it? No.
Well, that's how you describe
Yeah.
Superman, right?
Uh-huh.
Do you know that is in the Bible?
I don't.
It is.
I'm about to see where here.
All right here in Psalm 18:29. Anybody want to pull it up?
Psalm 18:29.
Psalm 18:29.
All right. What's that?
It says, in ASB, it says, For by you I can run upon a troop, and by my God I can leap over a wall.
Wow.
There you go.
Nice.
How about them apples?
You didn't even know.
I did not know that. Anybody want to share experience? Really, huh?
Nobody has one.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
I just have
Some of those are long stories.
I have a thought on your whole theory here.
Yes.
Okay, so
What theory do you have a thought on?
why you don't just base it on this?
Correct. Okay.
Okay, so if somebody wanted to argue your religion,
Yes.
they're more apt to pick that apart. Your story, your experiences versus, because they can't prove that you actually experienced that.
Correct.
So it's good to have the historical and worldly evidence, if you want to call it that, to support that. That's all. That's all I've been thinking about since you started that. So. I'm just thinking that's a good way to tell people that's why it's important. You don't just base it on your experience or even your friend's experience.
Right. Yes.
Because
Right. I completely
you may not
concur.
be able to physically prove that your experience happened.
Right.
So
Completely concur. I love how William Lane Craig said it. He's and this issue, I think he says a lot of things. He says perfectly. He says, "I can show you that Christianity is true, but I can show it. I'm gonna get the quote just right. I'm not going to say it until I get the quote. But the gist is, this does not make you believe it, but it shows it. That is to say, I can give you something to point that direction. He says, I know, the Spirit's experience in me is how I know it. That's how I know it. But that doesn't show it to you. I have to show different evidence to get that. I can't make you know what I know by that experience. Basically how it gets at it. And I completely agree. And that's one reason why I do this whole study. You're right. Is that so people ask me, why are you a Christian? I tell them. Again, it's not a class on evangelism, but I hope this counts. It helps you. Why are you a Christian? I say, well, because Christianity is true. I like to believe true things, and that's why I'm a Christian. It's true. Well, I don't. And usually it's going to be followed real quickly. Well, I'm not religious, or I believe in the power, or the Bible's dumb, or it's silly, or whatever. I go, whatever comes out of the mouth, unless it's a question, I'm going to ask them, why do you think that? Well, tell me more. I'm always more of a listener, as James says. Listen, be quick to listen, slow to speak. I listen to careful what they're saying. If they ask me, why do you think it's true? I'll say, that's a great question. I think there's nothing more important on planet Earth. I'm serious, so I'm allowed to talk about it. 3 reasons. I think Christianity, or rather say the Christian God, is the best explains a wide range of facts about reality. There's about 10 of them, in fact. I think Christianity is the best attested historical religion on the planet. I think it's by far the best historical evidence. Third, I've had a religious experience that corroborates the first 2. So if they say, well, I've had experiences too, I'll say, good. Well, and then someone says, well, how do you not know you're just delusional? And I've had you, I go, very good question. I could have been. Yep. I always concede that. Why in the world would you? Well, no, don't get all nervous. You're right, I could have been. And I always say, I'll do better than that. In fact, there are 2 ways I could be wrong. I could be delusional, or all the historical evidence I think is veridical, that is demonstrated to be true. I could be wrong. But I don't have a psychological disorder and so forth. And secondly, I've done all the historical work. And then I always turn it back. Have you read it before? Have you read the Gospels? Have you done historical work? And then go from there. Yeah.
You are correct.
Thank you.
He loves
Did you hear
hearing
that,
that.
honey?
He loves hearing that.
I give you credit. I give you credit for doing this because in John, in the first chapter of John, it's very obvious here that they're saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. So the Word is there. It means the Word is the promises of God. All the words, the Word. In the beginning was the Word. The Word is the promises, like I will never leave you nor forsake you, like God, or something. So it's in the first chapter of John. In the beginning was the Word. So it's there. You are correct. There's Christianity. Did you get my?
Kind of.
I'm confused.
Well,
I'm confusing you.
Well, maybe. That's okay. Well, virtually all scholars think that word means something particular there, and it's not the promises of God. So I was reflecting on that for a second. But when you say I'm right, what's the part about right about being Christianity being there?
The Word. The Word is like Word of God.
Yes.
Is that the Word of God? Is that the meaning there, the chapter of John, first chapter of John?
That's a great question. Their word means something like I won't write it out. It means something like God's rationality, God's ordering presence in reality. God's ordering presence is the source of life, the source of reason. Both Jews and Greeks and Romans all went to that to say that. So in that sense, when he says, you're right, in the beginning was the Word, in that time period, most people in the audience would go, yep, that's right. We already believe in that. The key is, John says, that Word, the key is in verse 14, became flesh and tabernacled in Greek, or dwelt among us. That's the ground-shaking verse. It's not that there was, in the beginning was a Word. Everybody go, of course, yeah, we all know that. I grew up in school learning that. And John says, that Word took on flesh and walked among us. Jews never talk that way.
Oh.
To this day they don't. That's blasphemy. And John said, that's right. Even his own, he says, turn him away. But the light shone in the darkness, because the darkness could not overcome it. That was John's way. He said just like, yeah. So that's what's controversial in that is that he became flesh. The Word became flesh.
Oh, okay.
That God's organizing principle, his reason, flesh. Yeah.
So, John, you got a question?
No, I'm good. You go ahead. No, go ahead.
All right. So
We got a few minutes left, so I'll do my best to.
okay. So anybody that listens to Christian radio hears this. Here's a phrase that we're living in a post-truth or post-Christian nation, society. How would you speak to us believers? How do we counter this? How do we counter this? That's changed in the last probably 10, 15, 20 years. So how do we counter this?
That's a good question. It might take me before I can't do that really in soundbite. You're right. I hear that too. At least I concur with you. I hear that often too. We're in a post-truth society, post-whatever. That really began in the 60s in something called deconstructionalism. It started in philosophy schools. And it became a movement on the high towers to say that we need a shift, and this was a gargantuan shift. It was a shift from what was called authorial intent, what an author meant when he or she said it, to what's called a reader response criticism. What do I think it means? The shift from authorial intent to reader response was a massive shift. Well, what do I think it means was a way to deconstruct those authoritarian, post-colonial, white man, male-driven, dominant way to tell me what that ancient person thought. You don't get to tell me. I decide for myself. That happened really in the 60s, really in Berkeley, California, and those kind of places. And in New York, on the coast. And then it crept into art, music. So like in music, deconstructionism became atonality. There's no tone anymore. There's no key. It's not the key of G. It's just whatever you want. Play drums. They used to have whole concerts at Carnegie Hall. Dudes would beat on garbage pails. I've heard the recordings. I was a music student. So that's deconstructionism. And it fed its way for a few decades, all the way down, of course, to the churches. But certainly in America. And it became this idea that it's my truth, and then there's your truth. So it is a common soundbite. What makes me happy is everybody knows that's nonsense. And they know it because they don't act like they're... No one lives like I'm thinking I should have... It's such a big topic. I'm trying to say in sound bites. When deconstructionism found its way through music, philosophy, art, literature, like I said, when it came through morality on ethics, it became what's called moral relativism. Moral relativism. That is, what's right for you, good for you is not right, or right or good for me, my truth, and so forth. So relativism. And that's to say, what's the right thing to do here? And they say there is no right. I had a guy at a previous church who was a key leader there for years before my time, who could stand that I come. He's tried desperately for 30 minutes to convince me and my wife at my kitchen table there was no such thing as truth. He tried hard. He tried hard. Wow. He laughed out loud when I said that, yeah, there are certain non-negotiables of the Christian faith, like Jesus existed,
I said that, yeah.
died on the cross. When I added some. You said some, and I added some. He went, that was hilarious. He was a consultant for years and years. I used to travel the country and tell everybody, you've got to understand, there is no such thing as right and wrong. So and he was a professor at the university for years and years and years. So he's a perfect example of that.
And a well thought of.
And Mobile just looked at him. He was scared. He was narcissist, egoist. Perfect. But no one lives out relativism. No one lives it out perfectly. No one does. No one. They just don't. They just don't. So what makes me happy is the human condition hasn't changed.
That's true.
They haven't. So if you ask a person, I mean, there's different ways at it. One is when I talk to people like that, I hear it. I know the historical background, and I just in the back of my mind, I assume they don't really believe that. In the real world, when they're talking to people, they don't think it's all relative. They think it matters. Back to C.S. Lewis' video. I don't know if you were here that night. They really do assume it's wrong to break in line. Not that I don't like it. It's wrong to do it. That it's wrong to murder. It's wrong. They assume they live that way all the time. And when I assume that in my conversations, it works out well. I just assume it. The second thing is I appeal to that inside of them. If we're having a discussion about it and someone says, no, David, why do you think I'm wrong? And I mean, only if they ask, or I don't, because I wouldn't go here right away because I don't want to sound like I'm being judgmental to them, because I'm not judgmental, is I would say, well, the reason why that's false is it's nonsense. The idea that there are no such thing as truths. My question is that statement true? That's self-contradictory. If nothing is true, it means the statement nothing is true isn't true. Which means that statement's false. I mean, so it's silly. No one really thinks that. So all that to say, I assume they do believe it. That's worked out pretty well in my conversation with people. They go, yeah, you do.
So I'd like to just add one more thing into that. Since you hit the 1960s up, it was in 1961, 62, and 63 in which the Roman Supreme Court, in 1961, if somebody looks into Torquaso versus Watkins Supreme Court, 1961, footnote 11, secular humanism is by the Supreme Court deemed a religion. And I think that very specific piece of information needs to be known in the Christian circles, because that is the beginning of the downfall of the Bible in the public schools. And anybody wants to study that. And then 1962, 1963, following 61, the Bible and the prayer was taken out of public schools. And from those 3 years, it was the beginning of the fallout of the Bible out of public schools. And here we are today.
Thanks a lot, 60s. Thanks a lot, 60s. Johnny, what was your thing? Anything else?
No, I was going to ask you if you ever talked to a Unitarian.
Unitarian?
Yeah.
Maybe once or twice.
You probably should explain what's that.
Yeah, Unitarian in general is the idea that really they're like Oprah. When I picture Oprah as like a good faith, that is, we're all in this together as long as we're good people, and all religions, and a lot of times in technical terms we call this pluralism. And so I get the analogy all the time of mountains. So and there's different mountains. Exclusivist said there's only one way to the top. There is one top of the mountain, and there's only one way up the mountain. And inclusivist says there's different ways up the mountain, but there's only one top of the mountain. A pluralist says there are different mountains, and they all get where they're going. And so sometimes there are Unitarians, or sometimes in the Far Eastern version called Baha'i, and they'll say all the religions really are back to this one. They're different religions altogether.
So I guess that's not what I'm thinking about. I'm pretty sure I thought Unitarianism was they don't believe Jesus is God. You know what I'm saying? They believe that they don't believe Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They don't believe it's Trinity. They believe it's not a Trinity.
As far as I understand, it's correct. Yeah. Whenever Unitarian or even Baha'i too, they diminish all the things that make the religions distinct. So and I found this to be across the board. If I talk to a non-Christian on the street, I will always assume that if they know anything about religion, they think all religions basically say the same thing. And 99% of the time, I'm correct in my assumption. Because what they do is they water all down to say they're all about being good. And there's a higher power or the universe. I had a guy, I was in training one time at a restaurant. He goes, they all say the same thing. And you don't speak up at all. We're talking about religion. They found out my background. And I don't usually disagree at all in those talks until it's about salvation. Then I go, because I feel like at that moment I need to correct someone. He goes, they all say the same thing. I said, no, they don't. He goes, yeah, they do. And I go, no, he had never studied this ever. And I go, so I talk to somebody. That's the point.
I love the conviction some people can.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? They say something with conviction and total ignorance, and
all the time.
It's just,
you're right.
Yeah, you do it with confidence. And
it baffles me. I've said this in many podcasts that so many times on YouTubes and lectures and atheists or whatever, they're so persuasive because they're just so confident, they're so cocky. You're all stupid. You're all these Christians, all fiction, fairy tale. And they go, the Bible's been disproven for centuries. And they go, oh, I didn't know that.
I don't do that about
They're just so confident. Yeah. And so people are scared. They go, well, he's got a doctorate and she's got this. And yeah, I agree. At the confidence level alone, if Chris will just buck up. And I'll say this last thing to wrap up. Because I didn't realize, I forgot y'all, the back to the, 1 and 1 and 2 Corinthians, by the way. In the manuscripts, they have no titles. The original manuscripts didn't have titles. They were added later on. So when you go to your Bible, for example, 1 Corinthians or 1 Corinthians.
And the reason you say that's because how you guys said it in school.
I'm about to go there.
Okay.
On the manuscript tradition, it starts, the manuscripts we have start with verse 1. In the original manuscripts, there are no verses. Chapters and verses were added centuries after the fact. So when you open your New Testament now, it's already been edited because it has the number 1 by there. And there were no numbers and there were no titles given to it until much later. Now, there probably was in Corinthians. But the title that says in the earliest manuscript says Alpha, that's a capital, that's lowercase. It'll say Alpha Corinthian, it's in Greek. Alpha and beta, so refer to 1 and 2, so the letters equal the numbers, A, B, C, D, E, alpha, gamma, delta, blah, blah, blah. And so that's it. In Greek, you can say alpha equals 1 or alpha equals first. It's synonymous. And so in scholarship, it's very common for them to say 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, because it usually means 1.
But you start using alpha.
What's that?
I'm going to start using alpha and beta.
Alpha Corinthians.
Alpha Corinthians, Beta Corinthians.
You're the first person I've ever heard it.
Trump said it. They got
Trump
said it.
Trump said it at a school, and they laughed at it.
And,
I felt sad for the students.
Yeah.
They're so ignorant. They
it
don't
was at
realize.
Liberty University.
Yeah.
I know the Liberty. Like, don't you? That's
That's
standard. And if you go to a scholarly meeting today, go to the Society of Biblical Literature. SBL is the premier religious around the globe. They all say that. It's all 1 and 2 Corinthians, 1 Timothy, and they go, I mean, if I was a religion professor, I'm like, that's sad for the students, not for Donald Trump. Like, y'all sound ignorant, and you don't know what he's doing. So you can say
You do say with enough conviction.
it's one of those things. Like, it's one of the things in my study. I'm so accustomed to hearing it say in some way for years and years and years at the academy that I forget that it's called other things. That's all.